Hello and welcome to the Fire Emblem game tier list video, my first tier list, and we have all of the games lined up in order. I've played all of them and beaten most of them. The only ones I haven't completed are 1, 2, but I have completed the remakes. It may affect where they go. I've also taken the liberty to cut down the tier list to D tier. It did have 2 more, but I don't think any of the games are bad. It's just the ones down here aren't as good as the ones up here in my opinion. Speaking of which is my opinion, this is not an official right or wrong list. Feel free to comment if you think something should go higher or lower. I'd love to hear your opinion on it as well. But anyway, let's just go ahead and get started. I did take the liberty to also make my own the tier list before this, so I'd have them in order, so you wouldn't have to sit here and listen to me think about what goes where. So let's start with Fire Emblem 1, the classic, the original. And despite being the very first entry in the series, I'm going to put in D tier. Yep, I'm putting it lower. This may seem a bit shocking, but Fire Emblem 1 and 2 are a clunky mess, and I really didn't have the attention to play through them. I believe I played Shadow Dragon before this one. And just going back and playing it, I didn't have a whole lot of fun. I know you have things like speed up buttons, and I think Nintendo did release this on the Switch if you have the Japanese version or if you change your account over. Maybe I'll get to playing that, maybe on the channel. I don't know if this game would hold too much interest. I do appreciate for what it is. Of course, it started the series, and I do love Marthy as one of my favorite characters in the whole series. Speaking of which, this game, now I do go over, I should have mentioned this to start, I kind of rank on gameplay more than story. This game, of course, does have a pretty basic story. The characters aren't really too fleshed out, being that it's an NES game. They didn't really have room to do all that back then, so I put this pretty low. It's not a bad game by any means, but I do think the ones below it in this area are a lot better. Now, Gaiden's interesting because it introduced a lot of mechanics that would carry on in later installments, such as like explorable areas, grinding, route splits, different promotions if you count like the villagers going to different like branches. So it does introduce a lot in the game for its time, a lot more than a game like the original one would. So I mark it actually up to C tier for that. It is, once again, an old NES game. It doesn't hold my attention playing it. I know there's some things in this game, like you'll get hit with, not necessarily ambush spawns, but you'll get enemies coming out of the boss area when you're like in Chapter 3, for instance, and you go back and promote people because you have to go to those shrines to do it. They'll send enemies at you and you'll get ambushed and have to go to a new map, and sometimes they'll be on the same map. That could be a little bit frustrating, dude. In Echoes, it's a lot cleaner, the interface, and just playing through it to get around that game. But this game, I do appreciate, I do love the music in this game. The gameplay, once again, a little slow for what it is. But yeah, Gaiden and FE1, never actually finished them. I probably should get around to doing that. Maybe making a video will give me the motivations. Doing an actual Let's Play of them might give me the motivation to finish. But really, I don't see too much of a point to doing that when I could just play Echoes or Shadow Dragon, even though people really rate Shadow Dragon pretty lowly too. But those are my opinions on the original games. I do appreciate them for what they bring, but they're not my exact go-to games if I ever feel like playing a game at random. So next up, FE3. I think FE3, I remember hearing it's like the Fire Emblem game of Japan, kind of like how FE7 is for America. And FE3, surprisingly, is my favorite of the Marth games, and kind of spoiler for when I rate the other two. I don't know why I like this game more. It is a lot easier to navigate through, being that I think this is the first Super Nintendo game, I want to say, that in FE4 and 5, but I find it just a lot easier to play. I don't know why FE12 and this game, like, maybe it's the avatar, maybe it's the very increased difficulty in FE12, but I think I did actually rate this one a bit higher than FE12, so another spoiler. Kind of happens when you have a game with the remakes like this. I actually put this one up in A tier. Yeah. I don't know why, it's just a very fun, relaxing game. I like the music to it. The gameplay isn't too intense like it can be in the remake. I don't know what this game's difficulty scales to in FE12, if it's like equivalent to easy mode or hard mode, but I don't have a problem playing through it all. I don't find anything too hard about it. I just think it's a really good retro game that isn't as slow paced as the other two. Yeah, I don't really have much to say about FE3. I just really enjoy that game. I do want to play that one on the channel too. I don't know how much interest it would hold because, once again, I don't know how popular the older games might come off to some people. But yeah, I think its story is also a little bit more interesting than the original for some reason. I don't know, probably because I invested more time in FE12. I will say of the Marth games, 12 is probably the one I played the most. So I'm kind of more familiar with that game. Maybe that's why I like going back and playing FE3. But FE3, decent game, a really good retro game if you're trying to get into something older. FE4, I know for a fact this one is on the Super Nintendo, and this is probably not going to come too much surprise to some people where I put this game. Even though I haven't played it yet, I will rank this one S tier. So FE4 is very different from your typical game, if you haven't played it. You may have heard that the maps are gigantic. Rather than completing a map, killing a boss, you go around and conquer the castle. And I just feel like it's a whole different experience. It really gives you a good, like, feel of medieval times and knights and fighting and conquering castles like what you do. It has some interesting mechanics with, like, warping around. A lot of people say they don't like the trade system in that game, and I can completely understand. It can get a little bit funky with how you have to have people like buy and sell stuff, and you have to make sure everyone's gold is like, you know, kept up to a certain level. I will also say, I should have said this before, it does contain spoilers, so yeah, but I won't spoil the big thing that happens in FE4. There's also a really big spoiler halfway through. It's a very emotional thing. It's something that I can't say has ever happened in any other game. It does have I will say it does have a parent-child system, like Awakening and Fates. The child system works a lot better than it does in Fates and Awakening, because Fates, they kind of just threw you a weird plot line for that one. But yeah, playing through 2 generations, managing your items, I just think it's really good tactical, because you have to think about who gets what items, who's passing what down. You do have to, the kids are tied to the mothers, so you might want to think about what father is best. Like, there's a lot of, this game has a lot of replayability, I find, and that's kind of big for a game of this era that's back like in the 90s. The story is incredibly engaging. I did say I wouldn't like mark story too much for any of these games, but from the moment you open the get into the prologue, it throws so much at you of all these different characters and who they are and what they do, and you don't even meet some of them. I know, for example, I think it mentions the Prince of Granville, but you don't really meet him, but he is important to the story. Sometimes you might actually have to play this game a couple times to fully grasp what's going on, and I feel like if I do play this on the channel, which I want to, definitely, we would do a full story mode. There's probably stuff I've even missed myself. It's just a whole different level of strategy you have to do compared to the other games, I find. Not just gameplay-wise, but just like items and skills and all of that stuff. It's a really different experience, and I would recommend playing it for yourself. If you do watch someone else do a playthrough of it, be warned of the spoiler, especially if they want to remake this game. I've heard rumors of this game being next in line to be remade, which would make sense because the 3 before it have been remade. Yeah, I actually can't wait to see a remake of this game. How they'll tackle the maps, if they break them down, if they keep them originally, how they tackle the big spoiler. It's gonna throw a lot of people for a loop, and I really look forward to that. FE5. So this game I did complete, but I've only completed it once, and that was through the help of a guide. This game, I feel, if I played it more, I would probably rank it higher, but it used to actually be in the low tier for me before I played it. This game I played up until the, what's called the Manster arc, and that's the part where it can get difficult, or you can really be thrown for a loop. But at that point, that was as far as I could play. I got to like a dungeon map and things happened. I'm not going to spoil too much of this too, try not to. And yeah, so as far as I ever got in a playthrough. But then I found a video series of it, and I sat down, and I watched that, and I played along with it to get through some of the more, not really hard. The game isn't really hard, but it does throw you a few curveballs. And I did really enjoy it, but I think for me, it's still probably solid mid-tier. Now, this is actually a really good thing if you are a fan of this game. I know a lot of people like this game. Going from D tier to B tier in one playthrough, I think is pretty significant. And maybe if I play this game more, get to know it a little bit better, it probably can shoot up to S tier for me. I do want to play it on the channel. I don't know if I'd use a guide or not. It might be fun to watch me do it without a guide and see what I remember. This game also does have a route split as well. I played the route, I think, with where you get Sleuth and Omalda. I think that's the B route. I know the A route has a really tricky, like, forest map you can get through, and I don't know how to get through that one because I obviously didn't play it. I didn't look at the guides, so that might be fun to watch blind. I don't know. The gameplay is not like it is. FE4 and 5 are connected because it's the same kind of cast of characters to an extent. The gameplay is a bit more traditional, like your average Fire Emblem. There's no huge maps. It is just go to one map at a time, seize the throne, and be done with it. It doesn't have that weapon system either where you have to, like, sell and stuff. It has the interesting capture mechanics. You can go around and just... This game, again, can be one that has a lot of replay value, I find. You can capture different units. You can... I don't know. There's just a lot you can do, but I haven't experienced it fully yet. I know when I did play it, I used like all the people that were like tiered good because I wanted an easy time. I wanted to go through with the best characters, but I feel like I can do one with like the meme characters like Marty, Ronan. I think I did use Ronan my first playthrough, but that might be something to look forward to. Watch me re-experience this game. It'd be almost like a semi-blind run if I did it, but yeah, FE5, a game I could definitely explore more like these two. Alright, so FE6. Now this one we are, as I'm making this video, we are doing a playthrough of it, so I don't know if that's going to affect what I have to say about it. I'm actually going to put it in A tier 2. We actually have a even tier list here. I'm going to put it here above FE3. So FE6, a couple years ago, I probably would have put as my least favorite GBA game. When you first play this game, it could come off... If you're used to FE7 and 8, this game could be a bit more overwhelming. The maps are a little bit bigger. The game is considered a lot harder. The hit rates aren't as high as they are in the other games. I believe when I started my FE6 playthrough, I showed like the Iron Lance, for example, has like 10 less hits. So that can throw people for a loop when they're used to the other GBA games. It's also, of course, not... Well, it wasn't as easily accessible when I first started playing. I think... Back in those days, you actually had to patch the game because it is a Japanese-only game. I feel like some people might forget that since Roy's so popular over here. Speaking of which, I think this game's also on the list for a remake too soon. But I actually grew to like the difficulty of it. Even though my playthrough right now, it's kind of like super easy because we have Corel replacing Roy in reverse recruitment. And he kind of just goes through and dominates everything, whereas Roy himself, he can't really do that. It is a game where Roy is considered like the worst lord ever, so you do have to play around that a lot. You do have to actually protect your lord and ferry him to the throne, or however you want to do that. It does have its problems with some unit balance, I will say. We all know people like Wendy, Sophia are often considered some of the worst units ever, where you have really good units like Milady or Cavaliers and such. So that might throw people for a loop too, because in most of the other two GBA games you can pretty much use anyone you want to. I know Sacred Stones you definitely can, but this one there's some units that you can just put it on the bench and forget. So I don't know how much, as far as like a diverse playthrough, I don't know how far it can go with that because most people do tend to gravitate towards those really good units. It does have route splits, so you can have a different experience when you do play. You can do A route in Ilia, A route in Sakai, or B route in one of those two, so you can have up to like 4 different types of playthroughs. But as far as I really do like strategizing what to do in some of these maps, there are Gaiden maps that are pretty difficult. I don't think I've gotten to any. Actually, I'm about to play one of the difficult maps here, but Corel kind of invalidates that. I might do another playthrough of FE6 one day that actually is vanilla, so we can actually see how you'd have to strategize and struggle through some maps, because with reverse recruitment, that's really not an issue. But yeah, FE6, interesting game. I like the difficulty of it. It is a game I had to grow to like. At first, yeah, it probably would have been maybe like C tier for me when I first played it a couple years ago, but it has gotten better for me. It is a little bit generic story-wise. I know the characters are like really bland. I think Alan, Lance, and Roy, for example, I like to do their support in like a triangle. I usually don't pair Roy with anyone, surprisingly. And they do feel a little bit generic, like, but I don't really play this game for the characters. I play for the maps. I play for the difficulty. So, FE6, pretty solid GBA game, I find. FE7 is now my... Let me fix if tier list works. FE7 nowadays is actually my least favorite Fire Emblem game. I don't know why. I played this game a lot, and this one, I don't know, its replay value used to have a lot of replay value for me, but now it really doesn't, and I don't know why. I usually do go Hector route. It does have technically a route split that's not really that different if you know how it works between Eliwood and Hector mode. And I'm also someone who likes to play Lyn mode because there's a few characters in that mode that I like to train up for the later part of the game. But I don't know, this game just... It's still a fun game for me. It does ease up in FE6's difficulty a lot. But I have heard this game isn't seen as well in Japan. And I think that's because it's really catered toward like a new player. Because obviously it's the first Western game. And it's catered towards new people. And when you're someone who's played all of these games before, you don't really need those tutorials. And I understand, well, you're playing Lyn mode. Of course you get the tutorials. But I don't know. It just does feel like it caters a lot to the new player, which is fine. Maybe it's the fact that I am a more experienced player now. I don't really appreciate that as much. This game, it is a little bit easier to use different characters. You can, of course, have unique playthroughs if you use like the quote-unquote bad units or something like that. Like I like Rebecca, for example. The characters I think do stand out a lot more than FE6. Everyone has like a personality quirk. I know I like Raven and Lucius a lot. I think they're hilarious. And Hector's relationship with Eliwood I think is really sweet. But FE7, yeah, it's just a little bland to me. I do like the fact that you can skip the Gaiden chapters in that game if they're too hard, but I like playing them anyway. It does have little like side quests like that, like FE6, what you need to do to get Gaiden. So it does add some extra layer of strategy to it. I actually haven't played FE7 quite a bit, so I probably do want to revisit that one soon. I don't know if I'd do a reverse recruitment to follow with our FE8 and 6 playthrough, or maybe a randomizer. FE7 does seem like a good game to randomize, unless you're like Hector turns into a dancer or something. But I don't know, FE7, it has fallen for me, but still a pretty fun game. You can breeze through if you have an overtrained Hector or your Cavaliers or something like that. So, kind of mid-tier for me. Sorry to all the Lyn fans that might get offended by this. But let's go ahead and move on to FE8. Now this one, this is where I have some bias. So Sacred Stones was my very first game. I actually did think Ephraim was Marth for a second when I first saw him. So I'm actually putting this in S tier. I know that's kind of unfair because, once again, first game bias. But FE8, its story really isn't that engaging, but I really like its characters and their relationship to the world. Route split, of course, different replay value. This game, I think, is also the one with the smallest cast of characters. So I don't know how much replay value you can get out of that, but I do know I've trained up every single person in this game at least once. Some people less than others, like Colm I don't really use a lot in EMI, but then some people I use all the time, like Tawna, Cormag, you know, the good units. But I always have a fun time playing this game. Like Sacred Stones, it's just, I don't know, I guess it's that nostalgia goggles you have on, being my first game. I remember reading through all the supports and shipping like Seth and Erica immediately. And the maps, this game is considered, I consider it the second hardest game in the series. You still do have to go to the tower and grind. It gives the player a lot of options, and I think that may be why I like it. I do like games that do give you some options, but not to the point of like 3 houses. But I'll get to that a little later. If you want to go to the tower and grind, you're more than welcome to. If you don't want to, you don't have to. There really is no wrong way to play. Having the branch promotions, which came from Gaiden, it does allow you to see characters in different ways. You might have, for example, Franz. He could be a paladin like Seth, Seth 2.0, or you might want to go see how he does in Great Knight. So I guess it could have replayability in that sense. Some people like to argue what is the better class for some, but the game is pretty easy where you can make everyone their worst class and you'll be fine. That's some of the charm to the game, I find, that you can just kind of do whatever, but it's not so open like Three Houses is. Moving on to the next game, Path of Radiance, and this one I actually do consider the easiest in the series, mostly because rather than going to the tower and spending hours grinding, you can just throw them bonus experience. So that's the one trait I find to be easier with Path of Radiance. So this one I actually put on the lower end of A tier. So Path of Radiance, most people know the Tellius games for a really good story, and I agree. It is pretty engaging. I'd still say FE4 is a bit more engaging for me, but Tellius did hold my attention. I'm really not a person who cares about story at all. Yeah, you should see me play Pokemon games. I actually don't like stories in those because it doesn't really need it. But anyway, Path of Radiance, easy game. The characters are really engaging too. You get to know Ike and Boyd right off the bat. You get to like them pretty easily. Titania's my favorite Jagan in the whole series. As far as the gameplay goes, yeah, it is pretty easy. I find the endgame maps to be a little bit boring, though. You have a lot of maps that are just open, like the one where you get Alencia playable, or the one where you help Jeffrey. The one with the boulders, the one with the pre-shoving. Some of them get a little bit too gimmicky for my liking. So when I'm playing through this game, like early game, I love it. Mid game, I still love it. You're still engaged in the story. And it has like arcs, like you have Act 1, Act 2, where you do the whole Bagneon thing, and then Act 3 where you start taking on the actual bad guys of this game. But I find by Act 3 it does fall off for me a little bit. It is kind of a slow, clunky game for being more modern. It is a GameCube game. That's pretty much what I have to say about that game. But what I will say is its predecessor, Radiant Dawn, this one I have a lot higher tiered than, well, not a lot. Path of Radiance is, of course, A tier, but Radiant Dawn, I put it at the bottom of S tier. I had to check to see if it was below or above Sacred Stones real quick. So this game, I find the gameplay to be a lot more engaging than Path of Radiance. I feel like there's a lot more strategizing to it. I love Part 1. Part 1 is considered the hardest part in the game, and that's where I like to be challenged like that. You have a lot of weak units to begin with. The way it shuffles around does also throw people off. A lot of people find it hard to make tier lists of the characters in this game. I know, like, I probably couldn't make a tier list of this game myself either. And the way you have to shuffle around units, I think, is a big part of the strategy. There's something you can do with there's a Part 1 character who moves on to the Part 3 army, and you can give her items to help them out with money. The Part 1 team, you really have to focus on a core group of units. For me personally, I like putting Edward in one of those units. Most people do like Nola and Jill. And when you get to Part 3 with that Part 1 group, I think that's really the test of how well you did in Part 1, because I feel like if you screw that up a lot, you're going to have a really rough time in certain maps in Part 3. The Part 2 area, I used to not like. I think it was kind of just, I used to think it was just like thrown in there randomly, but I actually came to like that one too as well. It's a very small part, it's only 5 maps, but your armies are thrown around a lot, and like you have different characters for every map is what I'm trying to say, and it's really an interesting take. Just having like, you're usually used to having, you know, your lord, your cavaliers, whatever, and you train them up the whole time, but this game doesn't let you do that. I think it's a really interesting twist. As far as the story goes, I think it is pretty good until the certain element. I think it's introduced in Part 3. It's a thing that a lot of people kind of harp on this game. It's kind of like a stupid cop-out or something like that, but I don't know. I don't really let that bar me. I still think the story is pretty good. It ties to Path of Radiance well, of course. You find out things from... It ties together any loose ends you have in Path of Radiance. So I think both the stories of both games come together really well. But I rate this one higher because I just really like that challenging gameplay a lot more. I do prefer a harder game. And the way it shuffles around units, you will get that challenge. So next up is Shadow Dragon. And this one gets pooped on a lot, I should say. A lot of people don't like this one. I actually saw a post in one community recently The person asks, has there been a recent Fire Emblem game aside from Echoes that didn't have an avatar since Radiant Dawn? And no one could think of anything until someone said Shadow Dragon, and everyone in the chat's like, oh yeah, Shadow Dragon exists. And it's like, wow, you forgot about this. So I think Shadow Dragon is a little bit easier access, smoother to play through basically than its original, but I don't think it's that much better. So I did this one recently. I did an Iron Man. And I don't know, the way the game looks, the characters are very bland. Like they did a faithful remake, which is a good or bad thing. It's good for the original fans. They like to have it how they remember it, but it didn't really, as far as I'm aware, it didn't really add like a lot more than the original. Like the characters really don't have anything to them. The maps are the same. I know they are. Once again, I don't have too much experience with this game to compare it, but I don't know. Shadow Dragon just feels very bland to me. FE12 definitely stepped up with more, not just the avatar, but different types of mechanics. And Shadow Dragon, I don't know. It is just that game that does seem forgettable. And even when I read that post, I'm like, huh, what game would they be talking about? Of course, I read the comments. I'm like, oh yeah, Shadow Dragon. So, yeah, Shadow Dragon is boring. I mean, it's not a bad game. Like I said, D tier isn't necessarily bad, but it's not... Of all these other games, it's not the first one I would play. So FE12, I did go over this one a bit in comparison to FE3. I put in a solid mid-tier. Not my favorite Marth game, but kind of close. It's only a tier below FE3. This game... I feel like the difficulty levels are very, how do I say, not well put together. Like I feel like there's a big step up between each difficulty. Normal mode is very easy. Hard mode is pretty challenging, I'd say. And I think I did my playthrough on Maniac, and that was very challenging. So a lot bigger of a difficulty spike than its original. I know the avatar is something else people really like to get on this game for. They feel like Chris kind of overtakes Marth in his part of the main character, overtakes Jag in his part of guiding Marth. Some people don't really like that. I don't mind the avatar. I think it is an interesting system. The way they did the whole, like, you create the avatar's backstory and that gives him or her the stats they would have for the rest of the game. The reclassing system, I will say, is pretty fun in this game, making everyone pretty much anything you want to. Well, almost. It can definitely lead to a lot of replay value, which is something I do value in games. The Gaidens are pretty tricky. It does have side objectives, so it's a solid game all around. For some reason, though, I just like FE3 better. I don't know why. You'd think this game would be a little bit higher, but I'd still rate this as a solid Marth experience. Whether or not you like an avatar, I don't think Chris is that bad as far as avatars go. We'll get to avatars more with Fates, though. But yeah, FE12, solid game overall. Awakening. So Awakening I played a lot, and this is the game that a lot of people did get into the series for. Now this game, I actually put it up in A tier, and that might seem a little bit... I think I do actually have it above FE6. I struggled a lot between these two. Awakening is the entry point for a lot of people, understandably why. It did, I guess you want to say, save the series. I played this game a lot when it came out. I mean a lot. I thought it had a lot of replayability. The pairing system I did like. I actually did play this before FE4. So the whole parent-child thing was new to me. And I thought was just a really great way to just have so many different types of playthroughs, so many types of unique kid characters and supports, since everyone can kind of support everyone in this game. The avatar, although they're a bit more, I think they're a bit more overbearing than Chris. My avatar, of course, married Crom, like, I don't know, 90% of the female avatars do. I do think there is a bit of Robin worship in this game, but I'll just say when we get to Fates, I'll get to that more. As far as gameplay goes, this one did have... It had less difficulties than FE12, and some people do get on this game for hard mode being a... Lunatic mode is essentially a lot harder than hard mode, and a lot of people, including myself, feel like there should have been something between, because Lunatic can be Frederick Emblem, but hard mode, to me at least, these days seems kind of easy. So it's either like a pretty easy difficulty or a very hard difficulty. The maps... The gameplay, I know there are some maps that aren't really good in this game. I know, like, the Wallheart map, everyone goes on about how it's like an open field and you just fight endless waves of reinforcements. This is another game with ambush spawns. I maybe should have mentioned that in FE6. Ambush spawns are something that I do find, if you know what's going on, they're not a problem, but for first-time players, which people were in this game, it can be a problem. I know that boat map, I've lost Olivia there a few times. The story itself isn't really anything to write home about. It is pretty generic. Like I said, story isn't something I really care about. But I'd say the replayability for me kind of trumps like some of the bad maps in this game. But I think there are some challenging maps as well. For example, Chapter 2, the bridge map. That one considered maybe like the hardest chapter in Lunatic. I like the challenge of that one. Trying to think of another one that's challenging. Chapter 3, where you have to go around like the staircases. I know there's a stretch to send Frederick one way. Awakening, just for the fact that this game did introduce me to child characters, and I played it and played it and played it and had so many different playthroughs, left really good experience for me. The avatar being able to waifu any character, yeah, just a lot of good memories just going through trying different combinations in this game. So yeah, Awakening, pretty high tier for me. So next we have Fates, and I will tier each game separately. So first is Birthright. Birthright, I think, is a good game. Fates is a very different mechanic system compared to these. In the dual strikes, the pair-up works completely different than Awakening. So a lot of the people who started on an Awakening, a kind of different set of gameplay rules they have to follow for these. Birthright, I think, is, once again, a good game to introduce you at because it is considered the easiest of the three. I actually put it, though, in C tier. I think I did struggle with where I'd place these two, but, yeah, maybe above Gaiden. And the one I made before this, I put it below, so I'll just keep it below. The story is pretty generic. As far as all three Fates games goes, this one is pretty much we're the good guys, we're going to beat the bad guys, end of story. Nothing to write home about there. The characters in this game, I don't think they can be as tropey as Awakening. That was another problem I did have a bit with Awakening. As far as the Birthright ones, now Birthright I probably played a lot less than Conquest, so I'm trying to think how they work. I know this game has the problem with everyone really loves Scorn. I know the siblings in this game are also Avatar worshipping, their whole thing, they want to bring him home. Yeah, so they're really not interesting to me. When they actually first released Fates, they had like a chart of like the neutral people in the middle, the Hashidans and the Norians. I looked through all the characters, and just my appearance alone, I did decide to go with Conquest because I felt like those were more interesting. But Birthright's maps really aren't that engaging. I know there are some good uses of the dragon veins in this game. The desert map, for example, clears the sand so you can move further, and that's a really, really good use of the dragon veins because in most of the maps between all three games, I don't think too many maps implement the dragon veins well. That's one where it does a very good job. Some of the late game of Birthright, I think it does kick up the difficulty. I know the Camilla map, where you're in those little like corridors. I know that one definitely threw me off because you just don't expect it. Right, it has some good maps, some not so good maps, but if you're trying to get into Fates, I actually would recommend Birthright. Even though I have it low, I think the developers did recommend Birthright, Conquest, and Revelation as far as order, and I can agree with that. So yeah, Birthright, easy game to get into learning Fates' mechanics. Alright, and next we come to Conquest, the harder of the two. And this one, despite Birthright being very, very low, I'm actually putting this one pretty high. So Conquest, I'm just going to say this right now, skip through the game story. Makes no sense. If you think Birthright is a little quirky in its story, Conquest's story doesn't really. Conquest gameplay, though. Conquest gameplay is why people like it, why I've seen this game tiered very high as well. It is a game where you have to work with limited resources, and I find that really, really fun for some reason. I don't know why. Awakening, of course, is a game that seems to be a lot more resourceful. I put that high too, but I don't know. There's something about just using, like in the early game, you have like 6 characters, 7 maybe if you recruit Mazu. figuring out who gets that reclass seal, or who, you can make Jacob into a paladin is one strategy, Mozu into an archer, make Odin something viable, something like that. I don't know, I just really like doing this strategy. Sometimes when I play through this game, I use the same strategies, but I have been branching out to use different types of things, like using the units I don't normally use. Like I always use like Silas or Camilla or Leo or Kaze, but trying to use some of those other characters like Laszlo, Perry, kind of makes for a different experience. Chapter 10, a lot of people dread it. I love it. The later game maps, I used to not like those ones too much because I thought that's where the game really amped up its difficulty, but as I've been playing this game over the years, I've slowly conquered Conquest, or learning how to handle these maps. And once you get a feel for it, because when I actually first played this game, I played it in normal mode and I thought it was too hard. I probably would have rated it low. But kind of like what I mentioned with FE5, if I have more time to like sit down and play it, it can shoot up, and that's what Conquest did for me. I don't know, I just really like that difficult playstyle. I like utilizing its mechanics. As far as the child system goes, and I didn't mention this in Birthright, as weird as it is, I do like getting some characters. I do like making different pairings, really thinking about who would help who. It's not so much, well, I like this person as this child's mother, because in these games the children are connected to the fathers, unlike Awakening and FE4. But like, for example, I do Niles and Camilla a lot because I think Niles gives Camilla speed and she really wants that, being a wyvern. So I kind of go with like what parent helps the parent. You actually have to like strategize. If you do plan on using the kids, like what can make the best kid? I don't know, like I know some maps, there really isn't a map in this game that I think is like super awful. I know the Ryoma map, for example, most people like to skip, and that one does give you the option. So you still get some options even though you're limited. I just really like that restricted playthrough. I don't know why. It's just fun for me. But you can still do other things if you do have access to the DLC. I know making Elisa Darkflyer is really fun. Someone into a Dread is fun, but I just have a lot of fun with this game. If you do want to get into Fates, though, I would still recommend Birthright to get used to how it works, and then Conquest afterwards. But yeah, Conquest, great game. Love it. So, Revelation. I think I said this before, but do not let the thumbnail fool you. Revelation is a game that has potential to be really, really good. Because in this game, you get both Conquest and Birthright's armies. You can do different pair-ups. There is a lot of potential mix-ups you can do in this game. You can have so many different, like, different types of kids, different types of pairings. However, this game kind of falls flat for me. I put in D tier. It's pretty low. Yeah, the lowest. Well, so far, but these two probably won't go as low. Anyway, Revelation is, every time you play through most of these games, you'll get to a map that you say, oh, not this map again. With Revelation, for me, that happens more than once. Like, you have the snow shoveling map, Sumeragi's elevator, Makoto's doors, the floating rock maps, the red and blue floor tiles. Like, I just feel like a lot of the gimmicks fall flat in the maps here. They're not really engaging. The route split, and I should say this for all three games, it does reuse the same maps. This one, I feel, reuses a bit from Birthright. The first half of the game, I do remember playing through a lot of Birthright maps, and you get a lot of the Hashiden characters first. And then they kind of throw the Norian characters at you right before the turning point, about halfway through, where you go and fight the real enemy. I don't know, it just feels very rushed and put together. There is horrible unit imbalance in this game. I know the retainers of some of the Conquest characters are severely underleveled by the time you get them, but you do have grinding, so I guess that kind of offsets it. And then once you do get into the actual like world you're supposed to go fight in, a few of the maps are good. Chapter 18 I like. The chapter where you clone yourself, I think, is fine in this game. In Conquest, I didn't really like. That's a map I actually don't like in Conquest because you only have like, you have Azura, Gunter, and Corrin, and of those three, Corrin is the only one I really try and get levels on. This one did that map a little bit better. But Revelation just had potential to have so many different types of, two people can sit down and play this game and it'd be two completely different playthroughs. We can use two completely different armies, but going through some of the maps doesn't really make it worth it to me. Dealing with some of the imbalanced units, I don't like grinding in games, so going to they have a DLC map where you can grind, and I think you can buy grinding maps on the world map, but I don't really like doing that, so I don't know, Revelation just kind of let me down, and it didn't really reveal anything. I mean, one of the biggest gripes I have with this story, and a lot of people, this story is like extreme Avatar worship. That's like one of the biggest things myself and a lot of other people despise, because Korn is just like the biggest Mary Sue of all time. But one of the things I also don't like towards the end game is how the Hashiden family gets to spend some final moments with both of their parents, but Garen really doesn't get anything with the Norians. He just, spoiler, he just kind of gives his power back to Anankos, and we really don't find out about him too much. Throughout all 3 games, I think Xander goes on about how honorable Garen was, and we really don't see that at all, so it just kind of leaves some things hanging that, you know, it should be revealed to you because it's called Revelations. Same thing with the Awakening characters that are in this game. I think you have to buy DLC, and I did not play DLC for this game, by the way, but I think you have to buy the DLC to figure out, like, why they're there. The game never tells you in Conquest nor Revelation why exactly those 3 are there. So there's just a lot of loose ends that didn't cover up story-wise. And gameplay-wise, yeah, if the map is bad, there's really not much you can do about it. So, yeah, as far as Fates go, it's kind of all over the place. Birthright, even though it's C tier here, I think it's mid overall. Conquest, very good. Revelation is Revelation. Alright, anyway, from that disappointment, let's move on to Fire Emblem Echoes, the remake for Gaiden. And I did say that, I think I mentioned this when I mentioned Gaiden, but this one, a lot more accessible, a lot more fun to play through. Echoes I don't think has too much replayability, but it really did a good job to flesh out people unlike Shadow Dragon. You have some new characters, Faye and, what's his name? Conrad, Celica's brother. The character interactions are a lot more. Of course they are more than an NES game, but you have like Tobin and Gray's relationship. It's cute, Toby Poo, and you have like Celica growing up with all her mage friends and how they're close together. Like there's a lot of good character supports and relationships in this game. The gameplay, I mentioned this in Gaiden, but it is a lot cleaner than the original. The maps aren't really, I haven't played Echoes in a couple of years, but the maps really aren't that different to its predecessor, but they kind of flesh them out a little bit more. I know that, for example, there's a map in Gaiden where you're split up in this forest and you have just 3 paladins to fight, and you'd go through that and like, what the heck is this? But in Echoes, they actually made that relevant to the story, to one of the antagonists. So I think they did a really good job of making these like, what the heck maps into something significant. I know there's also a map in Celica's route with like a lone cantor on a boat, and you get to that in Gaiden, like, what's going on here? But Celica kind of like explains that to you, like what's going to happen or what's going on with it. Kind of gives the player a heads up. So they really kind of like turn those really weird maps into something like beneficial for the story. It does have the options to, well, you do have to go through the dungeons for certain characters or promotions, but it does give you this sense of exploration. Not just going map to map to map, because sometimes, you know, that might get a little bit, for some people I guess that might get a bit overbearing, but just to take a break and run around and explore is something very unique to Fire Emblem games, because like I said, it is just going from chapter to chapter. So kind of really build upon what Gaiden had with its dungeon exploration, because Gaiden dungeons were just kind of like a room, and that was it. Echoes' story, once again, not really a story person, but I kind of knew what was going on when I first played, because I did play a little bit of Gaiden. There's a surprise with Alm and everything there. With I love Alm and Myson's relationship too at the end of the game. It's really cute. One thing I will say about this game, though, it did give me some feels. So I know there's some dungeons in this game where there's like one with like blood writing on the wall, and one with like in Celica's route there's like a diary that's written and just cuts off, and that spooked the crap out of me. Like I remember when I was younger I played Diamond and Pearl, and that mansion in the woods kind of scared the crap out of me then. In this game, playing as an adult also gave me the shivers. Like there's a lot of creepy things in this game, but it is one with like monsters and all that, so you would kind of expect that. It also relates to Sacred Stones a lot. I think Sacred Stones did take a lot from Gaiden, so I do appreciate this game a lot. Well, I do appreciate Gaiden for what it brought, but this game fleshed it out, and I really Really enjoyed it. As far as replay goes, it did give you those little like villager forks, so you can like make a whole new army. I think the DLC does have tier 3 characters, so a lot you can play around with than that if you wanted to like make. I think there's I actually want to do a run where I make Jenny a Pegasus because she gets a pink Pegasus, so I might have to do that one day. Alright, finally. Whew, my voice is a little sore from talking, but let's get to Three Houses. So Three Houses right now, maybe not right now because we do have a new game coming out, but I feel like everyone had a very, what's it called, a honeymoon phase with Three Houses where they praise the game to no end, and I actually feel differently than that. I put it in C tier. So why is Three Houses in C tier, you may ask? Well, for one thing, this game has 3 routes, as you expect, but I don't find them to be very different. When this game came out, I did play all 3, well, 4, if you count the thing that happens on Crimson Flower as a 4th route. I played it all at once, and the start of this game, you are playing the same game for about half the playthrough. Not until you get to the second half anyway. But what I'd say I don't like about this game the most is how sandboxy it is. And what that means is you have all these characters, right? And they're basically commoners and nobles, are like these weak little units, and you do have the option to build them into anything you want to. You can make a team of wyverns, which is the easiest way to play the game. You can have your physical units go magical and vice versa, make a challenge. You can have everyone go into what they're quote-unquote supposed to be, like Ingrid to a Pegasus. But I just feel like I mentioned, I like Conquest because it's very limited and I have to play a certain way. But this game, I feel like it's a bit overwhelming. Like, I feel like the challenge in Three Houses is not really the maps. Hard mode wasn't hard and Maniac mode wasn't that bad. Or maddening or whatever it's called in this game. But I feel like the bigger challenge in this game, this is going to be weird, is actually building your units rather than the maps. Like, there's just so much you can do. I personally find overwhelmed by putting all the skills on them. You have the combat arts, you have their own personal skills, all kind of stuff. I do feel it to be a bit tedious going through that every single playthrough, having to raise them up from nothing into whatever you want them to be. I feel like the characters also feel a lot samey to me. So, like, you have a character like Linhart, Mercedes, Marianne. They're your healers on each route. And then you have your archer on each route and your cavalier. And I feel like they all, like, kind of blend into the same thing. Like, FE6, for example, I'm playing that right now. The characters all feel unique in a sense. Like, you have Alan, the strong cavalier. Lance is the fast one. Luz is the fast mage. Lilina is the powerful one. Like, everyone has a different, like, trait or stat that they build upon. Like, do you want to use the mage who's fast but less hard hitting, or do you want to use the mage that's very hard hitting and probably gets doubled? Like, but in this game I feel like everyone just blends into the same thing. There's no like uniqueness to each character, and that's only gameplay, by the way. That as far as their personality, they really did a good job of like fleshing these people out compared to its predecessor Fates. You have the story, you do have a lot of world building. You do have to play through the different routes to get everything, and that is something that adds uniqueness to the route. But as someone who, once again, doesn't really focus on story too much, that doesn't really sell it for me. So Three Houses, it's not a bad game. It's an interesting game, but I think it's very different for a Fire Emblem game. Like, it's a good game if you do like building up that army, but as far as a Fire Emblem game goes, it's not particularly my favorite. But I do like a lot of the characters in the game. The exploration, it's fun the first time. The next playthrough, the monastery parts kind of become a little bit redundant. But Three Houses, I don't know, maybe it'll grow on me, maybe not. It's not really one, even though theoretically you can have so many types of playthroughs like you could in Revelations. After playing it so much at its release, I'm probably not going to play it again for a while. Anyway, I'm tired from doing all that, but that is my tier list for all of the Fire Emblem games so far. I don't know where I'll put Fire Emblem 17 yet. But please comment if you think something should be higher up, something should be a little lower. If there's something you think I missed, I kind of just put this video together at a whim. I said it would be our video for reaching 1,000 subscribers. And once again, thank you very much if you have subbed recently or in the past. I do appreciate it. Maybe next time we'll do a different type of tier list, maybe one for like characters in the game. I could definitely do Sacred Stones or Path of Radiance character tier list if you'd like to see that. But yeah, this is our tier list. Once again, this is not an official tier list. It's just an opinion. But yeah, I hope you really enjoyed watching this video, and I will see you next time.